Listen closely. Beyond the screaming choir of 10,000 psychers, beyond the psychic static that keeps the warp at bay, there's a sound that does not belong, a spark of discipline in a galaxy of madness. Imagine a man who has looked into the mouth of eternity and refused to blink. Not a pre-march, not a demon, but a sorcerer from a reality where magic has rules. He stands before the eternity gate, his eye of Agamotto pulsing with a light that is not fueled by the suffering of the Imperium. He sees the master of mankind, not as a god and not as a corpse, but as a catastrophic surgical complication. The custodes have their blades at his throat. They do not understand. They see a trespasser. I see a man about to perform an autopsy on a Sunday. What happens when the Sorcerer Supreme attempts to stitch together a soul that has been shattered across 10 millennia? Is it salvation? Or is it the final blasphemous insult to a dying empire? What is the cost of a miracle in a universe that demands only sacrifice? The air in the Sanctum Imperialis does not move. It stagnates under the weight of 10 millennia of incense, rot, and the oppressive psychic scream of God in perpetual agony. To enter this place is to feel the molecules of your own body protesting their existence. Yet, the reality here did not break with a bang, but with a subtle, geometric chime of 1,000 crystal bells. A jagged Mandalorian seal of orange light, perfectly circular, defying the chaotic, jagged edges of the warp, tore through the gloom. Outstepped a man in a high-collared cloak of living crimson, his boots clicking softly against the floor of the most forbidden tomb in the galaxy. I watched in the shadows of the high pillars, my bionics whirring in disbelief. He did not smell of the sulphurous taint of the psyker. He smelled of ancient parchment and the crisp, ozone-rich air of a mountain peak I had forgotten existed. Within seconds, the silence was shattered by the rhythmic, thunderous stomp of auric power armor. The Adeptus Custodes moved with speed that mocked their bulk, their guardian spears leveled at the interloper's heart. Captain General Trajan Valoris himself led the phalanx, his face a mask of cold, gene-crafted fury, which, the word was a low growl that shook the very foundation of the palace. You have bypassed the Aegis. You have trespassed upon the Holy of Holies. Give me one reason why your soul should not be fed to the fire. The stranger did not flinch. He raised his hands, not in a gesture of supplication, but with the measured poise of a scholar. Around his neck, a golden relic, an eye that felt as though it were judging the universe itself, began to glow with a rhythmic emerald heartbeat. I am not here for your throne, nor your secrets. The man spoke, his voice carrying a strange melodic resonance that cut through the psychic static of the golden throne. I am Stephen Strange, and I have traveled through 1,000 dying realities to find the one constant that is failing. Your master is not a god to be worshipped. He is a patient in a state of terminal collapse. You are guarding a wound that has been left to fester for 10,000 years. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. To speak of the master of mankind as a patient was a blasphemy so profound it felt like a physical blow. I saw the custodes hesitate, not out of mercy, but out of sheer, stunned confusion. No demon speaks with such clinical detachment. No heretic carries themselves with such terrifyingly calm authority. The eye of Agamotto flared, and suddenly the room was bathed in a light that peeled back the layers of time. The stranger looked upward, past a tangled web of life support pipes and the screaming choirs of psychers, straight into the desiccated face of the Emperor. For a moment the glamour, the blinding psychic radiance that forces men to fall to their knees, was neutralized. Strange didn't see the radiant king of old. He saw the truth we all fear to acknowledge. He saw a soul being pulled in 10,000 directions, a psychic rubber band stretched to the point of snapping. His face, usually a mask of stoicism, softened into something I hadn't seen in an age, genuine, unadulterated pity. "How?" he whispered. "Have you endured this much entropy without losing your mind?" The Captain General's blade was a millimeter from Strange's throat when the golden throne groaned. It was a sound like a tectonic plate shifting. A single spark of psychic gold arced from the throne and struck the stranger's cloak, not as an attack, but as a desperate, dying reach for help. The Emperor's will, usually a blunt instrument of galactic scale, had found a needle point. Valoris froze, his eyes widening as he felt a subtle shift in the air. The unbending anomaly had been recognized by the king. Strange looked at the custodian, his gaze steady and weary. The surgery has already begun, Captain General. The question is, will you help me hold the scalpel, or will you let him shatter? The sanctum fell into a silence so absolute it felt like the birth of a vacuum. Strange did not wait for permission. He moved with a practiced, efficient arrogance of a man who has spent 1,000 lifetimes studying the anatomy of the impossible. He raised the eye of Agamotto, and with a flick of his wrist, the emerald gears of the time stone began to churn against the stagnant flow of the 41st millennium. I watched as the air around the throne began to ripple, like heat rising from a parched desert. He wasn't just looking at the Emperor. He was peeling back the skin of history, searching for the exact moment the infection of fate took hold. To my bionic eyes, it looked as if reality itself were being put through a centrifuge, separating the gold of the Emperor's essence from the black, oily sludge of the warp that sought to consume him. "Your calendar is a lie," Strange murmured. His eyes glowed the reflected light of 10,000 years of trauma. "Time here isn't a river. It's a whirlpool. He is caught in a temporal stasis field that is fighting itself." He moved closer to the base of the throne, ignoring the custodes who tracked his every move with the tension of a coiled spring. He saw it then, the true nature of the Golden Throne. It wasn't just a life support system or a psychic beacon. It was a cosmic meat grinder. He watched the ghosts of 10,000 years, the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers, being poured into the Emperor's soul like gasoline into a furnace. "You aren't sustaining him," Strange whispered, his voice thick with a surgeon's disgust. "You are using his soul as a filter to keep the filth of the deep out of your world. You've turned a man into a dam, and the dam is cracking." He reached out, his astral form momentarily shimmering into existence as a multi-armed specter, touching the jagged edges of the Emperor's psychic aura. The contact was violent. A psychic feedback loop slammed into Strange, tossing his physical body backward, his cloak snapping like a whip to catch him. He saw the wound, a jagged, psychic tear inflicted by a weapon that didn't just kill the body, but erased the concept of the soul. Horus. The name wasn't spoken, but it hung the air like a foul stench. Strange realized that the Emperor wasn't dying in any sense a mortal could understand. He was being stretched across the fourth dimension, one end of his soul pinned to the glory of the Great Crusade, the other dragging to the gutter of this dark age. He was a bridge made of raw nerves, and 10 quadrillion humans were walking across him every single day. "What do you see, sorcerer?" Valorous demanded, his voice cracking the stillness. He didn't lower his spear, but the aggression had faded into a desperate, shameful curiosity. Strange stood up, dusting off his robes, his expression grim. "I see a surgical catastrophe. Your god is a fragmented consciousness. His logic has drifted into the warp. His empathy has been burned away to keep the fire of the Astronomicon burning, and his shear was the only thing stopping a second eye of terror from opening in this very room." Strange paced the perimeter of the throne, his fingers tracing patterns in the air. "He is like a mirror that has been shattered into 1,000,000,000 pieces. You've glued some of them back together, but you've used the wrong adhesive. You've used hate. You've used fear. And those things, they don't hold." The Sorcerer Supreme turned back to the Captain General, the eye of Agamotto closing with sharp mechanical click. The emerald light faded, leaving the room in its natural, sickly amber hue. "The problem isn't the physical decay," Strange concluded, pointing to the mummified remains on the throne. "That is just a vessel. The problem is the psychic rot. He is trying to hold shut a door that was never meant to be opened, while his own mind is being eaten by the very people who pray to him." He paused, looking at his own trembling hands. "I can stitch the soul. I can stabilize the temporal loop. But if I do, he will stop being a beacon. To save a man, I must extinguish the god. Tell me, Golden One, is the survival of your species worth the eternal torture of the only soul who can lead them? To enter the mind of the Emperor is not to enter a dream. It is to step into a solar flare fueled by 10,000 years of distilled agony." Strange did not hesitate. He crossed his arms, his fingers weaving the intricate madras of the Vishani, and with a sharp, guttural incantation, his physical body slumped into the arms of a startled custodian. His astral form erupted, a vibrant, translucent specter of violet and silver, and plunged headlong into the golden inferno of the throne. He expected a temple. He found a graveyard of concepts. Within the Emperor's psyche, There is no self left, only a howling void where a man once stood, now filled with the jagged shards of shattered mirror. Each shard reflected a different facet of a dying sun: the tyrant, the father, the scientist, and the corpse. Strange was immediately besieged. This was not the warp, but something equally hostile, a psychic defense system born of absolute logic and absolute despair. The father aspect of the Emperor manifested as a towering colossus of burning light, swinging a sort of pure sunfire that threatened to vaporize Strange's astral essence. "Begone, anomaly." The thought voice boomed, a sound that felt like planets grinding together. There is no room for hope in this machinery. Hope is the fuel of the great enemy. Strange didn't fight back with force. He summoned the shield of the Seraphim, a rotating barrier of geometric amber, and held his ground. "I am not hope," Strange roared back to the psychic ether. "I am a second opinion. You are hemorrhaging your divinity to save a swarm of insects that has already forgotten your name." He pushed deeper, navigating through the Star Child facets, the tiny, flickering embers of the Emperor's remaining humanity. They were huddling in the dark corners of his mind, weeping for a dream of a secular galaxy that died in the fires of the Istvan system. Strange saw the Emperor's soul not as one entity, but as a psychic collective being pulled apart by the prayers of trillions. Every "God Emperor save us" was a hook, a barb that tore a piece of the Emperor's mind away from his center and dragged it into the warp. The Sorcerer Supreme realized the horrific truth. The Emperor was being eaten alive by his own worshippers. He was a living battery, his compassion stripped away to provide the electricity for 1 billion light years of holy war. "Stop fighting me," Strange commanded, invoking the 7 sons of Cenobus. A blinding, cooling white light erupted from his astral heart, momentarily dampening the Emperor's solar fury. In that heartbeat of silence, the Father paused. The giant lowered his sword. For the first time in 10 millennia, a single, coherent consciousness emerged from the debris of the Emperor's mind. It was a man, just a man, tired beyond capacity of words to describe, sitting in a garden that was rapidly being swallowed by a sea of black oil. "You are not from the great enemy," the man whispered. "You are from a world where the stars still whisper secrets instead of screams." Strange stepped forward, the cloak of levitation fluttering in the psychic wind. "I can stabilize the breach," Strange offered, "but I have to stitch these shards back into a single point. You will be whole, but you will no longer be a god." The man in the garden looked at the black oil, the warp, encroaching on his sanctuary. "If I am not a god, the Astronomicon fails. If the light fails, the species dies in the dark." Strange shook his head, his astral form glowing with a fierce, defiant purple. "The species is already dying because of the light. They are a crutch, and you are the brake. Give me the authority to operate, and I will give you back your voice." The Emperor looked at Strange, his eyes reflecting the death of 1,000,000 suns, and then he nodded. It was a silent, catastrophic permission. Outside, in the physical world, the Golden Throne let out a scream that cracked the marble floors of the Imperial Palace. The astral compromise was struck, a pact between a sorcerer of order and a king of ruin. The sanctum is a heart, and when a heart skips a beat, the entire body convulses. As Strange and the Emperor locked spirits in that silent, astral pact, the psychic resonance of the Golden Throne shifted from a rhythmic roar to a high-pitched harmonic hum. Outside the Eternity Gate, the air grew thick with a metallic tang of ozone and the heavy, humid scent of a coming storm. The bells of the inner palace began to toll, not by the hand of any servant, but rung by the sheer kinetic vibration of the Emperor's changing pulse. To the High Lords of Terra, this was not a miracle, it was an apocalypse. They had spent 10,000 years building a cathedral around a corpse, and the sudden movement of a finger is enough to bring the entire roof crashing down upon their gilded heads. In the Grand Convocation Chamber, the holographic displays flickered and died as the warp tide around Sol began to recede in a way that defied all known augury. The master of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica fell to his knees, blood weeping from his empty eye sockets, as the screaming voices of 1 billion souls were suddenly replaced by a terrifying, absolute silence. "The light," he gasped, his voice a dry rattle. "The Astronomicon, it isn't flickering, it's breathing." To these masters of the Imperium, Chained is the ultimate heresy. If the Emperor heals, the creed becomes a lie. If the Emperor speaks, their mandate vanishes. Panic is a slow-acting poison. But in the halls of the Sanctum Imperialis, it was spreading with the speed of a viral outbreak. Deep in the sublevels, a more ancient and calculating hunger stirred. Trays in the infinite, cloaked in a displacement field that rendered him a mere shadow against the Gothic architecture, watched the energy readings on his handheld chronosense. He had come to Terra to see if he could collect a fragment of the throne before its inevitable failure. But this was a new variable. A sorcerer from a reality of structured law was attempting to perform surgery on a god of entropy. Oh, how delightful! Trazen clicked, his metallic vocal cords buzzing with a scavenger's joy. The primitives are trying to fix the machine by talking to the ghosts inside it. I must ensure the fallout is preserved. He adjusted his staff, his necrodermis flickering, ready to scavenge the remains of whatever fell from the throne. The Inquisition did not wait for an invitation. Grand Inquisitor Erasmus Crowell, his face a roadmap of scars and cybernetics, led a detachment of Grey Knights toward the Sanctum. They move with the grim purpose of men who believe they are saving the galaxy by murdering a miracle. To them, Strange was not a doctor. He was the ultimate deceiver, a warp entity wearing the skin of a man and the arrogance of a king. Seal the sector. Crowell barked into his vox grill, the words distorted by the crackle of holy incense and static. If the golden throne is being tampered with, then the person doing it is already dead. They just haven't stopped breathing yet. The Grey Knights ignited their Nemesis Force weapons, the blue psychic fire clashing with the orange sparks still drifting from Strange's portal. Back inside the Sanctum, Strange felt the approach of the hunters. He could feel the cold, psychic blankness of the Sisters of Silence and the heavy, righteous weight of the Grey Knights closing in like a tightening noose. He was a man performing an open-heart surgery while a lynch mob hammered at the operating room doors. He looked at the Captain General, whose hand was trembling on the hilt of his spear. "They are coming to stop me, Valoris," Strange said, his voice echoing with the authority of the Sorcerer Supreme. "They prefer a silent god to a living man. You have to decide, are you the guardians of a relic or the protectors of Father?" The choice hung in the air, heavier than the mountain of stone above them, as the first melt-to-charge detonated against the outer seals. The ritual did not begin with a prayer, but with mathematical precision that would have made the tech priests of Mars weep with envy. Strange stood at the epicenter of the throne's mechanical rot, his hands moving in a blur of multidimensional geometry. He cast the sands and the sani into the air, not physical sand, but a shimmering anti-magic dust that fell over the golden throne like a cooling blanket. For the first time in 10,000 years, the screeching psychic feedback of the machine went quiet. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. I watched as the Sorcerer Supreme began to pull threads of pure white energy from his fingertips, weaving them into the jagged, blackened holes of the Emperor's aura. He was performing a soul graft, using the fundamental laws of his own universe to provide a framework for a spirit that had forgotten how to be whole. But the galaxy is not a vacuum, and in the 41st millennium, every miracle demands an equal and opposite horror. As Strange stitched, the segmentum solar erupted into a nightmare. Reports began to flood the vox casters of the palace. The Astronomicon was no longer a steady beam, but a pulsing, rhythmic strobe. Every time Strange pulled a thread tight, a warp storm the size of a solar system flickered into existence and then vanished. On 100 worlds, the psychic pressure caused the heads of choir psychers to detonate like overripe fruit. Strange's brow was slick with sweat, his face pale as he channeled the raw creative force of the Vashani through a body never meant to hold such power. "Hold the line," he gasped, the words barely audible over the crackle of the sands. If the soul suture breaks now, the psychic backlash will turn Terra into a second eye of terror. The golden throne began to vent a thick, black ichor, the concentrated gunk of 10 millennia of human suffering and psycho waste that clogged the Emperor's spiritual arteries. It pooled at Strange's feet, a sentient sludge that hissed and formed into screaming faces. This was a rot he had diagnosed. It was a physical manifestation of the Imperial Creed's darker side. Strange ignored it, his eyes locked on the mummified chest of the master of mankind. He reached into his cloak and withdrew a vial of the waters of the Wadham, pouring it directly onto the Emperor's parched, leathery skin. Where the liquid touched, the dry husks of flesh began to knit. It wasn't a total restoration. That would be a task for a god, but it was a stabilization. The patient was no longer bleeding out into the immaterium. The pressure inside the sanctum became physical. The massive golden pipes that fed the throne began to glow a violet, cherry red, then white, as they struggled to process the clean energy Strange was introducing. The machine was designed for the filth of the warp, not the crystalline logic of order magic. I saw Captain General Valoris brace himself against the heat, his golden armor blackening at the edges. He looked at the throne, then at the sorcerer, his eyes wide with a mix of religious awe and soldierly dread. Strange was literally rewiring the God Emperor of mankind. He was treating the center of the galaxy like a broken pocket watch, oblivious to the fact that the gears he was adjusting were the lives of trillions. "I see him," Strange whispered, his voice sounding as if it were coming from a great distance. "I see the anchor point." With a final violent motion, he thrust both hands into the center of the Emperor's chest. A shockwave of pure, colorless energy blasted outward, throwing the custodes against the walls and shattering the stained glass icons of the High Lords. For a single, eternal second, the golden throne went dark. The hum stopped. The light of the Astronomicon vanished. The galaxy held its breath. Then, a new sound emerged from the throne. Not a scream, not a hum, but a single steady and terrifyingly human heartbeat. Thump, thump. Strange fell to his knees, his hands charred, as the Emperor's eyes, real wet human eyes, flickered open beneath the golden cowl. The immaterium does not have ears, but felt the silence on terror like a slap across a screaming mouth. For 10,000 years, the Four Power had feasted on the jagged, leaking energies of the Emperor's slow death. He was a great, unmoving feast that never ended. But when Strange stitched the soul, he closed the wound. The buffet was over. I felt the change in the very marrow of my bones, a sudden, sickening shift in the psychic gravity of the room. The warp did not take this theft lightly. The shadows in the corners of the sanctum began to thicken, turning into a deep, bruised purple that bled from the walls. The great game had been interrupted by a player who didn't even belong to the board, and the gods were sending their most clinical executioner to reclaim their prize. A tear opened in the air, not the clean, geometric portal of the Sorcerer Supreme, but ragged, weeping sore in reality that smelled of old musk and forgotten despairs. Out stepped Belaker, the first Prince of Chaos. He did not arrive with roar, but with a terrifying, shadow-wrapped grace. His wings unfurled, casting a darkness that swallowed the light of the torches in his blade. The blade of shadows flickered with the souls of 1,000 dead worlds. "A surgeon from the stars," Belaker hissed, his voice a chorus of 1,000 dying whispers. "You seek to mend what was meant to rot? You are a child trying to hold back the tide with a sandcastle." The Prince of Shadows lunged, moving faster than the human eye could track, a blur of obsidian and spite. Strange didn't even look up from the Emperor's chest. He couldn't. To break his concentration now would be to drop the scalpel inside the patient's heart. "Valoris!" Strange barked, his voice strained to the breaking point. "If that shadow touches me, the Emperor dies. Keep him back." The Captain General did not hesitate. For the first time in history, the Golden Guardians of the Throne fought alongside a witch. Valoris and his custodes met the Shadow Demon in a clash of celestial gold and abyssal black. The Sanctum, once a place of silent prayer, became a slaughterhouse of concepts. The custodes fought with the fury of betrayed sons, their spears whistling through the air. While Belaker laughed, his body turned to smoke and shadow every time a blade found its mark. Strange was forced to multitask, a feat that would have liquefied a lesser mind. With his left hand, he maintained the psychic suture on the Emperor's soul. With his right, he cast the icy bushels of Ictalon. A wave of absolute zero frost erupted from his palm, coating the floor and the demon's legs in a mystical ice that even the fires of chaos could not melt. "You are an anomaly, little doctor," Belaker sneered, his shadow flesh cracking under the frost. "But you are made of flesh, and flesh always fails." The demon unleashed a wave of psychic despair, a concentrated blast of every failure Strange had ever suffered. The broken hands, the lost friends, the crumbling realities. It was a weapon designed to break the will. and in the grim darkness of his galaxy, there is no shortage of ammunition. I watched his strange astral form flickered, turning gray and fragile. For a moment, it looked as if the surgeon would collapse. But then, the heartbeat of the Emperor, that new, steady thump-thump, synchronized with Strange's own pulse. A surge of golden, untainted light traveled up the suture through Strange's arms and exploded from his eyes. It wasn't the Emperor's usual blinding glare. It was a focused, tempered beam of pure order. The light struck B. Laker, and the first prince shrieked, a sound of genuine existential terror. He was not being banished. He was being erased from the local reality. The shadow demon dissolved into greasy smoke, and the breach slammed shut. Strange slumped against the throne, his cloak tattered, as the first true word spoken by the Emperor in 10 millennia echoed in the minds of everyone present. Enough. The word enough did not fall upon the ears. It manifested within the marrow, a command of such absolute sovereignty that the very atoms of the sanctum seemed to lock into place. But as the echoes faded, the horrific physical reality returned. Strange pulled his hands back from the Emperor's chest, and I saw the cost of the miracle. The Sorcerer Supreme's fingers were blackened not by fire, but by the entropic weight of 10,000 years of redirected decay. The Emperor's body remained a ruin, a parched, leather-wrapped skeleton that mocked the vibrant soul Strange had just restitched. The spirit is anchored, Strange wheezed, his breath coming in ragged gasps that frosted in the air. But the vessel is a sieve. I am pouring a sun into a cracked cup. In a desperate gambit, Strange reached for the eye of Agamotto. The green seal groaned as he forced it open, the time stone pulsing with a violent, rhythmic emerald light. He intended to do the impossible, to reach back through the chronal stream and pull the Emperor's physical form forward from the moment before Horus's mace fell. He began to rotate his hands, and the air around the throne began to blur. The rotting bandages on the Emperor's arms started to whiten. The sunken pits of his cheeks began to fill with ghostly, translucent muscle. But as the time loop expanded, a terrifying alarm began to scream from the depths of the palace. The golden throne was not just a chair. It was a cork in a bottle. By reversing time on the throne, Strange was inadvertently loosening the seal on the shattered webway gate beneath it. "Stop," Valoris roared, his voice cracking with fear I had never heard in a custodian. "The cellar. You are opening the cellar." Beneath the dais, the impossible city of the webway groaned. 10,000 years of demonic pressure, held back by the Emperor's constant psychic output, sensed the temporal instability. The floor began to buckle. Strange looked down and saw the reality. To fully heal the Emperor's body, he would have to undo the very stasis that kept the breach closed. It was a cruel, cosmic joke to give the Emperor back his hands. Strange would have to hand Terra to the warp. The Sorcerer Supreme's face was a mask of sweat and calculation. He was a doctor who had discovered that the only way to save the heart was to let the lungs collapse. "I can balance it," Strange gritted out, the cloak of levitation whipping violently as it tried to stabilize his footing. He summoned the hoary host of Hoggoth, creating spectral pillars of smoke to reinforce the physical structure of the throne, but the time stone was fighting him. The laws of 40K are not the laws of his universe. Here, entropy is a sentient, hungry thing that demands its pound of flesh. The more he tried to rewind the Emperor, the more the warp breach widened. A single, to lone hand, miles wide in psychic reflection, began to push up through the floor of the sanctum. The Emperor's eyes, those new wet eyes, looked at Strange with profound, terrifying clarity. He knew the price. He had always known the price. Through the telepathic link, the Emperor's voice returned, not as a roar, but as a weary, cold instruction. "Do not stop." The Emperor wasn't asking for healing. He was asking for the strength to finish his own death. He reached out with a hand that was half bone and half flesh, his fingers closing around Strange's wrist. The Emperor began to siphon the Time Stone's energy himself, not to heal his body, but to accelerate the stitching. He was burning the stone's power to bridge the gap between his shards. Strange screamed as the raw chronal energy surged through him, acting as conductor for a god's final desperate act of will. The room exploded in a flash of white and green, and when the light cleared, the webway gate was silent. But Strange stood shaking, holding a hand that was no longer his own. The explosion of chronal energy did not dissipate. It solidified, turning the air into a hall of mirrors that stretched into infinity. We stood in a cathedral of what-ifs. In one pane of glass, I saw a galaxy where a heresy never occurred. In another, a universe where the Emperor had already ascended as a Dark King, a fifth god of ruin. Strange stood at the center of the kaleidoscope, his breathing shallow, his cloak of levitation tattered and scorched. The Emperor was no longer just sitting on the throne. He was standing within the mirror, a figure of shifting, terrifying proportions. The stitching was successful, but the result was a psychic entity that defied human nomenclature. He was whole, yes, but a soul that has been broken for 10 millennia does not return with its mercy intact. Strange looked at the figure, the newly coherent master of mankind, and recoiled. He had expected to find a man restored. Instead, he found a mind that had been calcified by the absolute necessity of survival. The Emperor's eyes were no longer wet with human tears. They were twin pools of cold mathematical gold. He looked at the Sorcerer Supreme not as a savior, but as a tool that fulfilled its function. "You see it now, don't you?" the Emperor's voice echoed, cold enough to freeze the blood in my veins. "You came to heal a father. You have instead reinforced a cage." Strange shook his head, his hands trembling. "I gave you back your voice. I gave you back the ability to lead your people away from this meat grinder." The Emperor stepped closer, the shards of the mirror dimension crunching beneath his feet like glass. "My people do not want a leader, Stephen Strange. They want a shield, and a shield has no need for a heart." He gestured to reality outside the mirrors, the screaming High Lords, the bloody-handed Inquisitors, the trillions who knelt in terror. "If I show them the man, the Imperium collapses. If I remain the god, the species endures as a slave to my will. You have repaired the mirror, but you have only made it reflect my coldness more clearly." Strange realized in the fundamental tragedy of the 40K universe. The Grimdark wasn't a wound that could be healed. It was a choice that had been made so many times that it had become a law of nature. The Sorcerer Supreme's arrogance finally broke. He saw the burden the Emperor carried. Not just the weight of the Webway or the Astronomicon, but the weight of being the only person in the galaxy who could say no to a god and mean it. He saw the Emperor's choice. To remain a fragmented, suffering deity was a mercy to the galaxy. For a healed Emperor was something far more dangerous. A healed Emperor was a conqueror. A healed Emperor was a being of such absolute order that he would prune the galaxy of all imperfection, including the very humanity he sought to save. Strange looked at his own blackened hands and realized he hadn't performed a healing. He had performed an awakening of something that perhaps should have remained asleep. "You are a monster," Strange whispered, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. The Emperor did not deny it. He simply looked at the fractured glass and reached out, his hand passing through the mirror and back into the physical world of the Sanctum. "A monster is merely a god viewed from the perspective of the prey. You have done your work, sorcerer. Now, see the cost of your compassion." The mirrors began to shatter, the shards falling like snow, as the psychic pressure of the new Emperor began to exert itself upon the Imperial Palace. The gravity increased. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient, unforgiving gold. The mirror was whole, but the reflection was terrifying. The climax of the operation did not require a scalpel, but a sacrifice. Strange understood now that the final stitch wasn't a psychic thread. It was a bridge of living energy. The Emperor's soul was a sun that had forgotten its own gravity. It was drifting, leaking into the immaterium and feeding the very monsters he sought to starve. To fix this, Strange had to do something that defied every vow he had ever taken as a doctor. He had to bind the Emperor's consciousness back to the Golden Throne, not as a prisoner, but as a pilot. Using the Book of the Vishanti, Strange summoned the vapors of Volter, a thick, swirling mist of azure and indigo that acted as a spiritual adhesive. He began to compress the Emperor's sprawling psychic presence, forcing the vastness of the god back into the narrow, agonizing focus of a single, coherent ego. The physical cost was catastrophic. As the Emperor's mind was crushed back into his frame, the Golden Throne began to vibrate at a frequency that liquefied stone. The massive cooling vents erupted in pillars of white-hot steam, and 1,000 psychers in the outer chambers died instantly. their souls not consumed by the warp, but inhaled by the sudden vacuum of the Emperor's return. I saw a strange body begin to fade, his corporeal form becoming translucent as he poured his own life force into the suture. He needs a tether. Strange screamed, his voice echoing from the astral plane. He cannot hold the Astronomicon and his own mind at the same time. I have to create a loop. He was proposing a psychic circuit, a way for the Emperor to be awake without letting the galaxy fall into darkness. The Sorcerer Supreme reached out and grabbed the jagged edges of the Emperor's golden armor. He channeled the entire power of the Eye of Agamotto into the throne's ancient circuitry, using the Time Stone to create a perfect moment, a microsecond of total stability that would repeat for eternity. In that loop, the Emperor will be both the king on the throne and the man in the garden. It was a solution of breathtaking elegance and profound cruelty. To save the Imperium, Strange was condemning the Emperor to be a conscious, feeling witness to his own eternal torture. The god would be gone, replaced by a man who could feel every wire, every needle, and every prayer. The great stitching reached its zenith. A pillar of white light, untainted by the warp or the golden throne's filth, erupted from the palace and shot into the heavens. It pierced the clouds of Terra, clearing the smog for the first time in millennia. On the moon, the Sisters of Silence fell to their faces. In the deep void, the ships of the Battlefleet Solar saw a beacon so sharp and clear it blinded their navigators. Inside the sanctum, I saw the Emperor's hand close into a fist. The mummified flesh didn't just knit. It hardened into a golden metallic substance. He wasn't becoming human again. He was becoming a living statue of law. Strange's cloak was shredded. His hands were bleeding silver energy, but he didn't let go. He pushed the final stitch through the center of the Emperor's forehead, sealing the third eye of the warp with the mark of the Vishanti. "It is done," Strange whispered, his voice a mere shadow. He released his grip and fell backward, his body hitting the cold stone floor with a hollow thud. The white light faded, replaced by a steady, terrifyingly calm golden glow. The golden throne was silent. No hum, no screams, no steam. The Emperor sat perfectly still, his head bowed. For a moment, I thought the sorcerer had failed and killed the master of mankind. But then, slowly, the Emperor raised his head. He looked at his hands, solid golden and steady. He looked at the unconscious Strange in an expression that was neither gratitude nor hatred. It was the look of a general who had been handed a weapon he never wanted, but knew exactly how to use. The surgery was a success, but the patient had become the executioner. The silence that followed was not the peaceful rest of a healed man, but the heavy, suffocating tension of a guillotine blade held at its zenith. Strange lay on the stone, his breathing a shallow rattle, his spirit flickering like a candle in a gale. He had survived the surgery, but the galaxy he woke to was changed. I watched as the Captain General stepped forward, his guardian spear lowered not in aggression, but in a strange, trembling uncertainty. He looked at the throne, and then at the man who had dared to fix it. There was no celebration. In the grim darkness of the far future, a miracle is just a new form of catastrophe. Strange had given the Emperor a voice, but in doing so, he had stripped the Imperium of its most useful tool, the ambiguity of a silent god. A single, golden tear fell from the Emperor's eye, carving a path through 10,000 years of grime before it hit the floor with the sound of a falling star. He did not speak to the High Lords, nor to the trillions who waited outside. He looked only at Strange. "You have returned me to the cage of the self," the Emperor whispered, the voice no longer a psychic blast, but a human sound that carried the weight of a billion funerals. "You have done what my sons could not, and what my enemies feared most. You have made me responsible again." With a slow, deliberate movement, the Emperor reached into the air and tore a hole in the fabric of the sanctum, not using magic, but using the raw authority of mind that now controlled its own reality. "Go," the Emperor commanded. He did not say thank you. A king does not thank a surgeon for sewing him back into a war zone. Strange felt the pull of the mirror dimension, the familiar geometric tug of his home reality. He looked back one last time, his eyes meeting the Emperor's. In that look, there was a silent understanding. Strange had saved a life, but it had doomed a soul to lead a crusade that would now be more efficient, more cold, and more terrifyingly successful than ever before. The Star Child was dead, The master of mankind was back. Strange vanished into the shimmering portal, leaving behind a tattered red cloak and the smell of ozone, back to a world where magic is priceless, but never prices quite this high. The aftermath was a masterclass in imperial erasure. Within the hour, the Grey Knights and the Inquisition had secured the Sanctum. The stranger was declared a psychic hallucination, a collective delusion born of a temporary warp flicker. The High Lords who had panicked were quietly replaced. The scribes who had recorded the heartbeat were executed. The Imperial Creed was adjusted with a surgical precision that would have made Strange proud. The Emperor hadn't been healed. He had simply ascended to a new state of vigilance. But the Custodes knew. They stood taller now, their eyes reflecting a gold that was no longer fading. The Emperor was awake, and his first command was a list of names, a list of every corrupt official, every failing sector, and every rot that had grown in his absence. I remain here, in the shadows of the pillars, recording what the official histories will never dare to whisper. What is the value of the soul in a galaxy that has already sold its own? Strange thought he was bringing medicine to a graveyard, but he only succeeded in giving the ghost a general. As I look at the golden throne, I see the Emperor's hand drumming rhythmically on the armrest, a man waiting for the first move of a new, terrible game. The galaxy didn't get its savior. It got its architect back. And as the Astronomicon burns with new, cold, and unwavering light, I can't help but wonder if, strange to see the fires the Emperor is about to light across the stars, would he have ever picked up the scalpel?